Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Meeting Students' Need Through Increased Learning Time. I would like to introduce you to your very first speaker and moderator for today's event. She is the Senior Program Manager, Ms. Jennifer Wattring. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. As Gerald said, welcome to Meeting Students' Needs Through Increased Learning Time. We're excited that everyone's here to join us today. And in addition to being the Senior Program Manager for the Adventure Group, I'm also the REL Appalachia Events Lead. So we thank everyone for joining us, and really we just want to begin by sharing a little bit of information with each of you about REL Appalachia and what a REL is. A REL is a regional education laboratory. There are 10 RELs across the country. REL Appalachia happens to be the REL that we are part of and that we partner with, and currently serves West Virginia, Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. The REL program is administered by the U.S. Department of Education, and really we work to serve the needs of a designated region, which in this case is Appalachia. We work in partnership with school districts, state departments of education, and others to use data and research to improve academic outcomes for students. An example of one of the things that we do is the webinar that we're having today. In addition, we have other in-person events, bridge events, and workshops that really help to bring research and practice together for teachers, administrators across our region. This is a map of a REL, what the RELs look like across the United States, and as you can see in the gray, REL Appalachia covers Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. There are 9 other RELs across the country, and each of those is color-coded with the various states that are covered. One of the things that we also want to make sure that everyone is aware of, that even though we are REL Appalachia and we cover those 4 states, we also do a lot of cross-REL work, where we will work with REL Pacific or perhaps REL Midwest. So the RELs don't just work in their region, they also work across one another and across states. The goals of the webinar today are to promote awareness of increased learning time models, and we have some speakers that are going to be sharing both research and practice with you. We want to increase the knowledge of the current research on increased learning time, deepen the understanding of the importance of aligning increased learning time programs with student data, and demonstrate a range of academic and non-academic student outcomes that can serve as key indicators of success of ILT programs. The mission of REL Appalachia is to meet the applied research and technical assistant needs of Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. And this particular event today, we have attendees from all of those states. Our webinar events are not limited to one particular state. A lot of times our in-person events will be geared towards that particular state or district, but our webinar events do allow individuals from all over the country to attend. In addition, an item of the mission of the REL is to conduct empirical research and analysis, and really, most importantly, is to bring evidence-based information to policymakers and practitioners. And we really want to inform policy and practice, as well as focus on high-priority, discrete issues and build a body of knowledge over time. The REL has a tremendous number of resources available for you. If you've never checked out the REL Appalachia website, the link is before you, as well as the Twitter handle that you could follow REL Appalachia on Twitter. So as we get started with our speakers for today, what we'd like to do is ask you just to take a moment and answer the poll question in front of you. And we're asking, which of the following best describes your role? And you'll see 8 answers listed before you, and they're listed as A through H on your poll. If you would please just select which of those best describes your role, we will then process those answers and show everyone just in a moment. So if you'll just take a couple minutes, answer that question. And really this helps our presenters know more about you so that the information that they share is aligned with your role and what you'll do. We'll cover a lot of topics today, building on both research and experts' experiences while working in various states, districts, and schools. While we have an agenda full of information, if we know a little more about you, we may be able to tailor some of the discussions to you and your role. We appreciate your input, and the poll results will be available in just a few seconds. So it looks like we have a number of people that are listed as other. We have also increased learning time providers. It does not appear that we have a large number or actually any of those. We have some SEA staff, 12%, some LEA staff, as well as our highest number next to the other would be classroom teacher. For those of you that answered other, if you would, please enter into the Q&A box what role you have so that we can have a better idea what your role is if it's not one of the ones that we have listed before you. And we'll just give you just a minute to do that. Again, if you listed other as your role, if you could just quickly type in what that role is into your Q&A. As we do that, I'll go on to the second polling question. And this question is, which of the following best describes the primary reason you chose to participate in the webinar today? And again, if you'll look down through the 6 choices that we have and answer those A through F on your polling, we're really just trying to attempt with the information we're bringing you today to balance research information with specific implementation examples and information about different processes used for providing support. We'd like to know more about you and what information you're looking for. So if you'll please answer that question, and then just remember at any time during the webinar event today, if you have a question for presenters, please use the Q&A, and when each presenter is completed their portion of the event, we will have a Q&A session where we'll pose those questions back to not only that presenter, but other speakers that we have today for them to answer for the group. And the poll is ended, which means we will have our results momentarily. And a lot of people, 52%, had answered that there was more than one reason above that they were interested in attending. That some are looking for resources that can support planning, and some are looking for information about different increased learning time models. So I think our speakers have all of that information ready to share with you today. So thank you for answering those questions for us, and I'd like to now turn our session over to Dr. Jim Lindsey. And Jim will be sharing information on the new REL report on increased learning time.
All right. Thank you very much. This is Jim Lindsey, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. If you've got ability to see me, to see the other presenters, you won't be able to see me because my camera doesn't seem to be working. But again, my name's Jim Lindsey, and I worked with Yale Kidron on conducting this research review. I'm here today to give you a high-level overview of why we conducted this research review, how we conducted the review, and the findings from the research review. First, let me discuss our definition of the increased learning time. We use this term to refer to different types of student-focused interventions that have a particular feature in common, that is time. That is, we focus on interventions that increase the amount of exposure that students have to learning, but occur outside the normal school hours. These types of programs are being promoted as school improvement strategies. For example, local education agencies that received school improvement grants and adopted a turnaround or transformational model were required to provide increased learning time. Also, federal funding for 21st century community learning centers is founded on the belief that increasing instructional time outside of normal school hours will improve student achievement. However, given the different approaches that districts can adopt to increasing learning time for students, they need to know what the research says about the types of programs that improve student outcomes and the types of conditions that improve the chances that those programs actually increase student outcomes. That is where this research review comes in. The findings that we present can provide such information, can provide that kind of information. Okay. This research review is different from other reviews that have been done. First, this review encompasses research that focused on the amount of instructional time that students receive regardless of when that time occurred. That is, this review includes a number of types of approaches to increasing instructional time, such as out-of-school programs, such as science clubs or young authors clubs, or just additional instructional support that occurs after the official school day ends. Another type is summer school programs. Another type of increased learning time program are expanded learning time schools, that is, schools which lengthen their school day. And finally, another example would be year-round schools, or schools that lengthen the number of instructional days in their calendar. Whereas other reviews have focused on just one type of increased learning time approach, this review looked at all the approaches, thus allowing educators who are considering adopting such a program to see a summary of research findings across the types of programs. Another difference between this review and others is that our review focuses on the most recent studies, those that occurred after 1998. Some of the more frequently cited research reviews occurred before this date. This is important because research studies have been getting more and more rigorous, which improves our confidence that studies of increased learning time programs are really measuring program effects. We also adopted review standards developed by the What Works Clearinghouse, which ensures that only studies capable of detecting causal relationships are included in the review. The What Works Clearinghouse had not even been established before 1998. Our review also looks at whether increased learning time programs improve student achievement, but we also drill down into findings to see if we can identify the types of approaches that may work best, the types of outcomes that are most affected, and the student populations that are most likely to benefit from such programs. These are the specific research questions that motivated our study. So in general, we asked which type of approach affects student outcomes, which outcomes are most affected by such programs, under what conditions do these programs work the best, and what are the program features that are related to the strongest impacts, and which student populations are most affected by these programs. Okay, without getting too technical, the methodology used for this review ensures that our findings are trustworthy. The review represents all of the research conducted on increased learning time programs. We focused on just those types of studies that were capable of detecting causal impacts And we adopted a process of reviewing studies that removed any type of subjectivity from the review. So in other words, we didn't cherry pick from our favorite studies when we conducted this literature review. Our comprehensive strategy for finding relevant studies yielded a pool of over 7,000 studies. We screened out about 7,000, we screened out 6,835 of those studies because we deemed them non-relevant, and we also screened out another 165 studies because they failed to meet the What Works Clearinghouse standards. As you can see here and in the next slide, the 30 studies were conducted primarily in elementary school or middle school settings. Otherwise, the studies focused on a variety of student populations, locales, and regions. All right. So I've held you in suspense for too long. Let's look at what our review found. First, our findings show that instructional time is not the silver bullet that will improve the student outcomes in your schools. That is, there is insufficient evidence to suggest that increased learning time is an effective approach for promoting the academic outcomes of all students in all settings. And I emphasize the all students in all settings there. Rather, the evidence as a whole indicates that whether increased learning time produces an impact depends on the type of approach that is taken, the features of the program, the populations of students participating in the program, and the settings. For instance, here is one effect that was found. There were studies of out-of-school programs on literacy achievement, math achievement, academic motivation, and social-emotional development. The evidence indicates a statistically significant effect of out-of-school programs on academic motivation, but not on the other student outcomes. And the size of this effect is relatively small. In terms of program features, there were positive impacts on students' literacy achievement and math achievement when certified teachers led the learning groups rather than volunteers or college students. And there were also positive impacts when a traditional instruction approach was used rather than an experiential approach. Programs improved student social emotional skills when increased learning time programs used the experiential instruction. So we see that the type of outcome that you're trying to affect, the program features should be important in determining which types of outcomes you're trying to improve. For student populations, programs had small but statistically significant effects on literacy and math achievement of non-at-risk students, but these programs had substantial effects for students whose academic performance was below standards, as well as programs also had substantial effects on the social emotional skill development of students with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Studies of increased learning time programs conducted in suburban settings showed substantial positive effects on literacy achievement. Also, studies of increased learning time programs conducted in mixed settings, that is, studies that were conducted in different types of settings, showed small but statistically significant impacts on math achievement and academic motivation. Increased learning time programs had a small but statistically significant effect on literacy and mathematics achievement for students in the elementary grades. But the one population that may be harmed by participation in increased learning time programs are middle school students. Specifically, the 4 studies that examine increased learning time programs and literacy achievement among middle school students showed a statistically significant negative effect. However, increased learning time had no effect on middle school students' achievement in math. All right, in summary, this review was comprehensive and systematic. Only studies that met What Works Clearinghouse standards or standards with reservations were eligible to be reviewed. And just because a school adopts or develops an increased learning time program doesn't necessarily mean that it will improve the outcomes for all students and in all situations. Rather, districts considering whether to adopt an increased learning time program should consider the type of outcomes to focus on, how to staff and implement the program, and which students should be targeted by the program. This last slide is a summary of the effects that I've presented today, and it's all summarized in one big picture here. What you see are situations in which we found effects and what the outcome was. And so the cells that have bolded type are ones that showed a substantial effect, and the cells that have a non-bolded effect were those that had statistically significant effects. The difference between statistically significant and substantial is that substantial effects are those that can produce about 10% improvement for your average student. Statistically significant effects, however, are those that produce less than 10% improvement for the average student, but still overall across all students in all studies, it still produces some small effect. Okay, at this time I will answer any questions that have been asked.
Okay, if anyone has any questions for Dr. Lindsey, we ask that you type them in to the Q&A panel for moderation. And we have one question that's asking, can you please speak to the generalizability of the findings of your meta-analysis?
Yeah, so the generalizability. So the key point of the meta-analysis was that overall, in general, across all populations, settings, and situations, there were no effects. However, the effects were more specific. In other words, it's a combination of settings and populations and outcomes that you should be looking at. So in other words, if you're looking at kind of overall in general, the findings they're reliable. The overall effect is around 0, but it really is important to drill down and look at the specific types of populations and settings that you're addressing.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question that says, what can we expect to see in different programs based on your report?
Well, the effects are mixed, and so the different types of programs have different effects for different populations in different settings. In other words, you really have to look at the type of population you're trying to affect and the setting that you have and your locale and all of those other things to really see what kind of effect you expect from the type of program that you're implementing. I wish there was a great general answer that I could provide for this question, but it's really, the findings are really specific that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well, we will now be going on to our next speaker, Dr. Yael Kidron, who is the principal researcher from American Institutes for Research. Yael?
Yes. Hi, everybody. So the biggest question that comes out of Dr. Lindsey's presentation is, can you please, okay, here we go, is, did the increased learning time field figured out the magic bullet to increase student motivation, but did not find yet the answer to promoting academic achievement? My presentation today is going to attempt to touch on that question while telling you about two free resources from the U.S. Department of Education that, some of you may be already aware of. And by talking about those, I'm going to link the meta-analysis and show how we can connect between resources to make sense out of everything together, kind of a synthesis. So the first resource is the U.S. Department of Education Institute of Education Sciences, or IES Practice Guide, which was authored by an expert panel. The chair of the expert panel, Megan Beckett, worked with her experts and researchers from the Waters Clearinghouse to identify the most rigorous research on increased learning time, similar to the meta-analysis that Dr. Lindsey talked about, which also looked at Waters Clearinghouse vetted research. There were 5 recommendations made by the expert panel, and the first one might be perhaps the most difficult one to achieve: increased learning time, aligning the program academically with the school day. On its face, it seems like something that could be kind of obvious for increased learning time programs, especially expanding learning time schools, but reality is that the vast majority of districts across the nation and schools across the nation do not follow that recommendation today, although there is research showing that it's very effective. So what does it mean to align academically with the school day? It means ongoing communication between teachers and out-of-school staff, or if you have expanded learning time school that operates a model like the New York City after-school program, in which it's not teachers that teach after school, although it's kind of a long school day, but they have trained instructors teach after school. We would like them to talk with the classroom teachers in order to understand both the objectives for the grade level as a whole and objectives for specific students. We need to keep in mind there is a reason why the regular classroom instruction is not enough for some students. Why there are students that are in need of increased learning time, either in the form of voluntary participation or Tier 2 intervention for them. And understanding their needs requires close collaboration. This is a big message that the practice guide was hoping to communicate to states and districts and schools. It's all about collaboration. One way to address it, the practice guide says, is to designate a school-based coordinator. The school principal will need to figure out how to find a time for that coordinator to make sure that those communications happen. Another way is to provide information to providers about the goals, which means standards, resources, and most importantly, opening the door to professional development. If states and districts provide professional development resources, why not open them up to the increased learning time providers as well, if they're already there? What we found in the REL Appalachia meta-analysis was that certified teachers in increased learning time programs are associated with positive outcomes, while trained instructors are not associated with statistically significant effects. So this corresponds to that key action of the increased learning time practice guide, saying, make an effort to hire school staff even if it's a burden on your budget. Finally, I would like to make a note that in sharing information about students, especially vulnerable children that might have some life situations that are the reason for the need for the Tier 2 support, make sure that you follow FERPA guidelines for protecting student information and privacy. And this is the responsibility of states and districts to make sure that schools are aware of FERPA guidelines. The second recommendation is, on its face, again, straightforward, maximizing student participation and attendance. If they're not there, they're not learning. This is not a surprise, especially the secondary school level, and we saw it in the meta-analysis of the REL Appalachia report because it was explained many times in the studies that we reviewed that program providers try to design their programs while striking a balance between being engaging and fun and maintaining a high level of academic quality. And this is a challenge that may have not been resolved yet because, as Jim pointed out, there are no positive effects noted so much for middle schools, while there are positive effects noted for elementary schools. One way to increase attendance is to promote awareness of programs within the school and among parents. And this is something that is a challenge also at the elementary school level. I can tell you about instances of schools who found ways to resolve that. For example, Marshall Elementary School in San Francisco is a school that I visited in which a coordinator was assigned to communicate with parents, especially parents who are non-English speaking. And that coordinator made it a goal to make sure that parents feel that somebody listens to them and that their voice is taken into account when program operation decisions are made. And finally, use attendance data to identify students facing difficulties in attending the program. These might be the students who are mostly at need for the program. I can tell you about another school that I visited in Akron, Ohio, in which the school district administered a survey to all the parents. And that survey had tremendous importance not only to understand how to work with parents to increase attendance, they also use it to communicate with potential funders of the program to get funding for transportation or whatever other services they needed to maximize attendance. I would like to also point out that a survey could also support financial sustainability if you include a question in your survey such as, how much are you willing to pay for after-school program participation for your child? This is a tremendously important question because you can gather information about willingness to pay and use that into account for funding when you run out of grants. The third recommendation is adapting instruction to student needs. And this is a student-centered approach. We would like those students who do not fit in the whole class instruction model to tailor it, whether it is by tutoring or breaking into small groups or using computerized instruction. The fourth recommendation, providing engaging learning experiences, is this balance between making learning fun and maintaining academic quality. And the key action here is building adult-student relationships. When students maintain trusting relationships and form attachment to adult figures in the program, they form the sense of connectedness or bonding that has been documented also in the positive school climate research. And this is not different in increased learning time research. So this was a recommendation of the practice guide. And fifth, assess program performance. This is a mixture of two approaches. One is based on the empirical view that says we need to have objective matrix for success. The other approach is we need to know what's going on in our program. We want to know what's successful in our program. As Jim said, if we combine all the effects across all programs, across all subpopulations, we found only positive effects for academic motivations, but not for mathematics or English language arts. But this, when we broke it down by different types of programs and different types of student subgroups, positive effects did emerge. And this is the same idea as the reasoning behind your own evaluation plan for your own site, which could inform also future funding and revisions to your program. Before I conclude my presentation, I would like to speak briefly about the second free resource from the U.S. Department of Education, and this is the School Turnaround Learning Community. This is primarily focused on school reform or school improvement or school turnaround, and primarily provides resources for state and district administrators. You should be able to find their videos and tools for supporting increased learning time, as well as archived webinars and announcements of upcoming events, upcoming webinars for increased learning time. And it has a searchable library. Another resource is, I hope that Jennifer has posted the URL in the Q&A box. There is a place where resources from the U.S. Department of Education developed as part of the Doing What Works initiative. All those resources are posted at that URL, and you can find them organized by those 5 recommendations I spoke of, videos, tools, and expert interviews that can provide more information how to improve increased learning time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yale. Next, we would like to go to any questions that you may have for Dr. Kidron. If there's anyone that would like to ask a question of her, if you could type that into the Q&A field, we will pose that question to her before we move on. And you'll have the opportunity, any other questions that come in, just for the sake of time, we'll go through those at the end of the event. So please, if you are in the middle of typing one, or if you have one that you think of after we move on, please go ahead and type that into the Q&A, and we'll address that after all of our speakers have shared their content. Our next speaker today is Mr. Joe McGowan, and he's the Vice President at the National Center on Time and Learning.
Thanks very much. It's good to be with you all today. Just to clarify, we're still on Dr. Kidron's last slide. Great. I'm going to talk with you a little bit today about one kind of increased learning time, and that is expanded learning time through a redesigned school day. First, a brief introduction, though, to the National Center on Time and Learning. We're an organization that works with states, districts, and schools to promote and implement high-quality expanded learning time through a redesigned school day. The slide that you have in front of you now is a brief summary of the areas in which we work, and really today I'll focus with you on the bottom area, which is improving school practice. And the other areas in which we work are around generating knowledge, and I'll share with you a few documents that we hope will be of interest to you around expanded learning time. Also building support through advocacy for increased learning time and informing policy at the state level and federal level around the potential benefits of increased learning time. And I want to echo a couple of things, and I will continue to echo them, that both Jim and Yale alluded to, and that is that, and we feel that while we promote increased learning time through a redesigned school day, we also feel strongly that expanded learning time is not a strategy, it is a tool. And only if expanded learning time is accompanied with many of the best practices that Yale identified will it be successful. Our belief is, and this is based on work with hundreds of schools over the last decade, that expanded learning time provides an opportunity to do many of the things that schools and teachers want to do and kids want to do that they too often don't have the time to do, and that ultimately is costly to student achievement and to students' learning experiences. And so expanded learning time provides time for students to spend more mental energy around learning in the classroom, and also time outside of the classroom on enrichment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a catalyst and a condition to promote school redesign and turnaround, and it permits better integration of community partnerships. We were talking, both Jim and Yale talked a little bit about out-of-school providers. One thing that I'll talk a little bit more about is the fact that through an expanded day, really there's an opportunity, and we see in high-quality expanded learning time schools an opportunity and the reality for outside providers to come into the school during the school day and become a part of the fabric of the school day. And of course, deeper implementation of school and district priorities. There is research that, and I won't go into detail on this because Jim talked about this very eloquently and also talked about the implications of the research overall. There is research that demonstrates that when used correctly or as an ingredient among a broader array of pedagogical and organizational practices, that expanded learning time can benefit students. And in front of you, you have an example of a few of those studies, and you can go back through the presentation and look for them again if you would like to. One important thing that often gets lost in our work initially with states, districts, and schools, but fortunately the message I think is being heard increasingly, is that more time benefits not only students but also teachers. Certainly it provides more time to raise student achievement, and it provides more time for students to participate in enrichment activities. So if many of you probably know this, but over the last 10 or 15 years, the amount of time spent on academics has basically maintained itself, increased slightly, but has increased slightly. The time spent on enrichment has decreased dramatically, especially in urban schools and high poverty schools. And by lengthening the school day, it opens up more time for all kids to access the kind of enrichment programming that many kids in wealthier communities continue to access, either through school or often through after-school programming paid for by their parents. But this is a critical component of the overall engagement of a student in their school, and we think it's something that's really improved through expanded learning time. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the idea of more time for teachers, more time to collaborate and improve the quality of instruction. And this echoes, again, something that Yale referred to in her portion of this presentation as one of the ingredients of high-quality increased learning time. As I walk through this slide with you briefly, you also should hear echoed many of the things that Yale was referring to. High-quality instruction, certainly, but the 7 essential elements of high-quality ELT schools are elements that NCTL has discerned over the years of working with schools and through research talking with leaders of high-quality expanded learning time schools. And in a note at the bottom of the slide, you can see a reference to time well spent, and I'll show you a URL link to that at the end of this presentation. But targeted intervention and acceleration accompanies or is one of the 7 essential elements. And while this is a two-dimensional slide, as you all know, education is a completely organic thing, and think of this more as a two-dimensional representation of something that's much more complex and much more active. But if we think about the bottom half of the slide, school-wide approaches around enhanced school culture, focused priorities, and frequent data cycles support the effective practices that high-quality expanded learning time schools demonstrate around instruction. We're going to focus with you a little bit on targeted intervention and acceleration, engaging enrichment, and teacher collaboration and PD. But as I was listening to Yale's presentation, excuse me for looking down now, but I realized that she had mentioned aligning the program academically with the school day, adapting instruction, hands-on experiences for the kids, ensuring that there's robust and valuable PD provided, assessing program performance, and maximizing participation and attendance. All of these things are reflected and echoed in these quality practices that high-performing ELT schools are focused on. Let's move on and really focus, dive in for a moment on data-informed interventions. And this slide is going to be a build. I'm going to build it relatively quickly so that you can see it all. As we unpack the one circle on the previous slide around targeted intervention and acceleration, there are characteristics that we have seen again and again and again in high-quality expanded learning time schools around intervention particularly, that it complements core instruction. And I understand that much of this, how it may sound like truism. The key here is that these are schools that take the time, and they have the time because they're ELT schools, they have the time to do this work well. There are plenty of schools that have interventions that don't optimize the time, the intervention time. One of the benefits of expanded learning time is it provides more time for teachers to analyze data, for students to work in small groups, and for teachers to receive professional development to ensure they're prepared to teach interventions with different targeted student groups, et cetera, et cetera. There's adequate time for students to reach proficiency. And I understand, again, that adequate time is a very vague notion, but the idea is that without being perfectly scientific about it, there is more time open for students to work on the things that they need to work on. Progress is monitored regularly. Students are grouped flexibly, and that flexible grouping is informed by data, and there's time for teacher collaboration on instructional strategies and grouping. And finally, the interventions are taught by trained staff. Again, what I'd like you to think about is the fact that this is happening in the context of a day that permits, because there's expanded time, that permits this work to go on in a meaningful and high-quality way. It's just not as easy and relatively impossible in a standard school day. I'm going to talk a little bit about, very briefly, an example from a school in Colorado, Pennington Elementary School. It's a school that we've worked with planning expanded learning time, and they began implementing expanded learning time a year ago. This is just a brief anecdote about their intervention time. And these numbers correspond to the numbers on the previous slide. But at Pennington, and I'm going to show you a typical schedule on the next slide, but there's 40 minutes of daily intervention in literacy and math. They're an expanded time school. They have an 8.5-hour school day. And all of their students receive intervention or acceleration in both literacy and math every day. They group their students in groups of 2 to 8 that are based on multiple assessments. They provide 4 ELA and 4 math interim assessments a year, and they group students accordingly. And students in more discrete monitoring units are checked every 1 to 4 weeks. Teachers review the data, they adjust their groups to some extent, and they adjust the curriculum or the teaching strategies that they're using. And the classes are all taught by content experts. So folks that are ready to teach the interventions in math, or the folks that are teaching them in math, same thing in ELA. And the schedule permits this to happen. I'm going to talk a little bit off of this slide as you read it to let you know that there are many ways that schools figure out how to expand a school day, while also recognizing that there are times when teachers either don't want to work that expanded day until 4:15 p.m., the full 8.5-hour day for personal reasons. And one of those is to stagger the school day, and another one is to incorporate partners into the school day. So in this instance, the enrichment elective at the end of the day is provided most often by outside partners that normally would have been after-school partners. There's a beneficial difference for the partners here as well, and that is that with an expanded school day, all of the students are participating in these enrichment activities. And so it can actually increase the opportunity for after-school providers to provide services to a given school. But you can see how at the beginning of the day, breakfast and assembly takes place, and then literacy intervention, literacy core, lunch and recess. Specials would be things like art, gym class, etc., read aloud, math core, etc., etc. But all of the students, again, are receiving literacy and math intervention. There are vertical intervention teams by support level provided, so there are Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports that are provided. And these, during the specials period, the teachers have a collaboration time to review data. As I said, in vertical intervention teams. So the idea is that this expanded day opens up the time. Again, it is not a silver bullet, as we've heard before. We think that it is a necessary ingredient to lift student performance and give them access to the kind of enrichment that all kids deserve, and that too often kids in the most needy schools don't have, whether it's because of moving them into more intervention when normally they would have specials or enrichment, or because of budget cuts, etc. But this is a way to reintroduce these kids to these enrichment electives that in turn help to bring them back into the fabric of the school and to be more connected to the school generally, a virtuous cycle around student attendance, etc. Also opening up the time for teachers to be professionals. One thing I like to say is in many professions, and in most professions, folks spend 80% of their time preparing and 20% of their time performing. With most teachers, it's almost just the opposite. It's 20% preparation and 80% of the time in front of their classrooms. One of the most powerful things, and then I'll finish up, one of the most powerful things I heard a teacher in an expanded learning time school say to me, to a group she was talking to recently, and I was part of the group, was, there was a lot of apprehension about going to an expanded day. I will say this, though, what I find is I do more of my work at school, and I have much less work to do at home in the evening, and I'm spending more adult time at school with my colleagues, and it's less exhausting that way. I'm not saying that this is a silver bullet, but I do know that that many teachers discover that there's a great value in that professional time with their colleagues. If it sounds like I'm an advocate for expanded learning time, you're right, I am. So thanks for tolerating that. I just want to share with you a few resources that are available. I believe that you have been given access, or you will be given access to 2 of the documents, the one on each side of this slide, the Jacob Hyatt Magnet School profile and the Mastery Charter Schools Shoemaker Campus profile. Time well spent, the URL is there for you. And there's another document that NCTL published recently. It's called Time for Teachers. And this is a collection of best practices around teacher collaboration time in expanded learning time schools, that is accompanied by case studies and synopses of the way these schools are using their teacher time most effectively. NCTL continues to work with schools and districts around the country. We're working in 5 states now on an intense planning and implementation of expanded learning time schools with probably 14 districts. And certainly I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. And thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. One question that we've had come in is, does expanded day require special agreements with the teachers union?
Thanks, a great question. Generally, yes, it requires some kind of an agreement with the teachers union. It depends, however, the nature of that depends. There are some districts, some schools rather, that have a side agreement from the standard union contract with the whole district, and those things can range, those agreements can range from a willingness of teachers to stagger start times. So some teachers will start at the ostensible beginning of the day, and others will start an hour and a half later, and the ones that start at the beginning will finish an hour and a half later. Other agreements include stipend pay for the expanded learning time for teachers that participate in it, or pro rata payments for the expanded learning time. That's another critical ingredient is, as we work with districts and schools, is bringing the union to the conversation right off the bat, immediately. We encourage schools to spend basically a school year of planning time in order to really establish a deep and thorough implementation plan for expanded learning time, and also to engage both union and community stakeholders, families, obviously, teachers and students in this planning process. Thank you for asking that question. I'm glad that it prompted this, an opportunity for me to tell you just a little bit about how important it is to plan for expanded learning time.
Okay, another question. Have you worked with schools in rural areas where busing is a problem?
We have done less work in rural areas than we have in urban areas. I will say, though, that transportation is a challenge, and it is a consistent challenge. And so far, if we get the district engaged early enough, and we get the transportation folks in the district involved early enough, generally schools and districts have been able to figure out a way to work around those problems. I would anticipate that it would be even more challenging in rural areas than in urban areas. But I would say this: I would not let that be. I would not let that discourage me from exploring the possibility, because it's amazing when people get their minds to it, what they can come up with for creative solutions around transportation.
Okay, another question. Can you speak to Pennington Elementary's student achievement trend in the last few years, and what impact you've seen as a result of their implementing expanded learning time?
Yeah, I can. In the last year, the first year of implementation of expanded learning time, their results on state tests were mixed. They had several areas that they made statistically significant improvements in, and there were some areas that they declined. One thing that we have seen is that over the years of working with expanded learning time schools, there are a couple of things. First, improvement tends to accelerate during the second year, and second, the conditions in the individual school are highly, not statistically, I'm not a statistician, nor am I an academician, but I'm going to say are, using the layman's term, significant, are a significant predictor of whether or not the school is going to be successful. It really requires tremendously powerful school leadership. And by the way, you may be saying to yourselves, well, yeah, that's true, but any good school requires tremendously powerful and positive school leadership. Absolutely. Again, what I would say is expanded time is a is a facilitator of all of the good things that good schools do. And we think it helps schools turn the corner with challenged, when they're in challenged situations with their school population. And again, it allows them to introduce enrichments back into the lives of these kids that too often don't have the opportunity for enrichments. But to get back to Pennington, there's been significant improvement in several areas, and there's been some decline in a few areas in the first year of implementation.
Okay, and we have a couple more questions, but for the sake of time, we'll go on, and then as we have time at the end, we will pose these questions, and they will be directed at any of our speakers, but probably specifically you, Mr. McNown.
Sure. And I'm glad to talk with anyone offline as well. You're welcome to reach out to me offline. I welcome any opportunity to speak with you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Next, we have Blair Denson, who is the director of the Virginia Partnership for Out-of-School Time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon,
yes,
everybody.
we can hear you.
Great. I was just sort of watching that transition. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here this afternoon and to talk a little bit about the perspective of expanded learning time from the statewide after-school networks. I'm the director of the Virginia Partnership for Out-of-School Time, which is one of 42 networks in the nation dedicated to really looking at all the time that young people spend outside of the school day, which is typically about 70 to 75% of their waking hours. Let's see, can I advance this slide? There we go. So DPOST is a statewide public-private partnership, and we are funded through the Charles Stewart Mox Foundation out of Flint, Michigan, and our public dollars come to us from the Virginia Department of Education through Title IV-B, 21st Century Community Learning Center program. We also have some corporate sponsors and private donors as well, which keep the network up and running. And we are really working to develop and expand all services for young people outside of the school day. So we are thinking about before school, after school, summers, weekends, any vacation periods that young people have, and hopeful that we can help to broaden services so that young people can be actively engaged in programs during that expanded learning time. We provide technical assistance to all of the key players in Virginia that are working to provide those services to young people, and they are not limited to, but include the 21st Century Community Learning Center grantees, parks and recreation programs, community-based and faith-based programs like YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, and Big Brothers Big Sisters. We also work with the libraries in Virginia and many, many other organizations. Virginia is pretty saturated with military youth as well. So we also work with Operation Military Kids in Virginia to make sure that they are also offering expanded learning opportunities for the military youth that we're serving. We're also in the process of drafting quality standards in Virginia that we hope many, many different organizations across the Commonwealth will either adopt or endorse or give some sort of stamp of approval so that the programs that they are offering do meet a certain level of quality. And in addition to rolling out the quality standards in Virginia, we're also going to be releasing a code of ethics for the professionals that work in the field. So expanded learning opportunities, we've talked about that all day today, so some of what I plan to say may be a little bit redundant, and we're behind time, so I may just run through this a little bit more quickly than I had anticipated. But we do know that they offer structured learning environments outside of the traditional school day, and what we hope is that those opportunities for young people don't look so much like a traditional school day, but are really offering hands-on experiential learning opportunities that kids really enjoy. And I would echo some of what Joe and Yale said, that we don't want it to necessarily look like a school day. We want it to look like something fun that kids will really want to be involved in. In Virginia, the school day has become somewhat prescribed in standardized testing, and that's true in other states as well. So what we're finding is that expanded learning opportunities are really giving educators and youth development workers opportunities to provide these learning opportunities that young people seem to really respond well to. And those opportunities can include academic supports, mentoring, art, civic engagement, and of course STEM activities as well. Some of the activities that VPost is currently endorsing are academic programs, mentoring activities with collaboration with families and communities and schools, the hands-on experiential learning opportunities that I just discussed, and financial models of operating increased learning time programs. We want to make sure that these programs are affordable, scalable, and sustainable. And sustainability is one of the biggest hurdles that programs are up against. There's only one dedicated stream of funding right now in the state of Virginia for out-of-school-time programming, and that is the Title IV-B funds through the Department of Education. And that's a very competitive process. So finding programs that are affordable and that can be sustained and modeled through developing partnerships and merging resources and things of that nature are a big focus of our work at VPost. And we're trying to do that through civic engagement and awareness and trying to get folks more involved in understanding the importance of this time in young people's lives. As some of my colleagues have previously noted, we know that there are a lot of benefits and gains to keeping young people actively engaged outside of the school day. We know that the graduation rates are improving, academic gains are improving, students seem to be more engaged and are showing better work habits, and they're also much more socially well adjusted, we've found in Virginia, for young people that participate in out-of-school time programming. We're also seeing that young people that participate in these programs feel much more connected to their community. So that's a big push for us as well in Virginia. And we're also seeing that college and career readiness is being explored during that out-of-school time in Virginia. So I wanted to cite just a few, and forgive me for reading some things that I just couldn't get into my presentation. But what we're finding through a study at Chapin Hall in Chicago is that an After School Matters program found that students participated in their program missed fewer days of school than their classmates, and the students participated most frequently failed fewer core academic classes, English, math, science, and social studies. This is particularly noteworthy because the program is not aimed at improving academics, and we're finding some similar results here in Virginia. By creating an incentive for students to attend school regularly, it's giving them something to look forward to after school. In another study with LA's Best at UCLA, we've revealed that students' regular school day attendance improved once they began participating in the after-school program. So there's a direct correlation for attendance for young people that are participating in extended learning opportunities. There are also a lot of benefits for young people outside of academics and attendance. We're also seeing that this is also a big, huge benefit to parents and to communities. The LA's Best evaluation found that 3/4 of parents surveyed worried much less about their children's safety than they did when they were not participating in a program. And it also enables those parents to become, more active and productive members of society. We're seeing that absences from work decrease in communities where young people have access to programs, and it's a benefit to the community in general. One other study that I wanted to cite is an evaluation of New York City's out-of-school time programs for youth found that 74% of parents and participants agreed that the program makes it easier for them to keep their job. 73% agreed that they missed less work than they had previously because their children attended the program, and 71% of parents report that they are able to work more hours because their children are actively engaged in a program that keeps them safe. So as we've learned today, the research is abundant. We know that these programs are working, and trying to figure out the best way to make sure that more children have access to them is going to be critical as we move forward. The outcomes are broad and deep. We are currently looking for other performance indicators and ways to measure the impacts of these programs, and that has been an ongoing challenge for us in monitoring the programs that we're trying to do so in Virginia. But we do know that it's a great return on a very modest investment for the funding that we have in our state. We're seeing that every program that closes, for instance, we've got some divisions that are looking at trying to give increased learning time to all students, and we're finding that after school is a model that works in our state because we can serve more students for fewer dollars. And if anybody would like to talk with me about that in the future, that study is still being vetted, so I don't have anything publicly to release, but that should be coming out soon, because we do have one locality in the Commonwealth who exercised a waiver through Title IV-B to actually increase their school day rather than offering outside of the school day programs. So in conclusion, we know that these programs are keeping our kids safe, and they're helping working families, increasing social and emotional behaviors, academic achievement, and a benefit to the workforce. And we are also working to build capacity in Virginia for expanded programs for the youth in our state through these ongoing studies that we continue to work on to really measure what these programs are doing and the benefits of actually increasing the school day or offering other alternatives than just a longer school day. So with that said, I'm still 2 minutes over because I started late, so I'm going to stop and open this up for questions.
Thank you, Blair. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Denson? Again, don't hesitate to enter those questions in as we move forward, and we can revisit those at the very end of this session. But next, we will go on to Dr. Carol McGowan, and she is going to share information for us moving forward and be our last speaker that we have this afternoon. So, Carol, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Work at the American Institutes for Research. Are you guys hearing an echo? Is that me?
No, we're not hearing an echo, but it looks like maybe your webcam is trying to buffer. So we may want to turn that off, Gerald.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Still echoing.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. It's just spinning for your webcam.
Okay. I can move forward then. The great thing about being the last word is that I can give you the practitioner perspective on research. Since we know that there are a lot of people on the call who have been working in after-school programs in a variety of ways, that you might be saying from this research study, well, there's no causal effect on student achievement. Why am I doing this work? And the reason is really what both Mr. McGowan and Ms. Denson mentioned, and that is really being able to help with other effects, not only that lead to student achievement, but are only part of student achievement. For example, Dr. Lindsey mentioned that academic motivation is a big part of, or is not statistically significant, but is a part of an outcome that they saw in their What Works Clearinghouse level research studies. And in other programs and in practitioners all across the country, both in after school, before school, extended day, extended year, summer school programs. So all of those things really provide opportunities for kids to get engaged in learning and help and are part of the building blocks for what a student can do, or what a student can feel confident in doing, and that motivation part is really something that we're trying to focus on. We really know that with the delineated elements that we're working on, that students feel better about themselves and more confident, and they have a stronger interest in being able to put what they're learning into context, and that is a big factor, particularly in low-income schools. It's also a way, we talked about engagement, but it's also a way to build much stronger relationships with peers and adult leaders. So in our own work, in the practitioner side of the work or the professional development side of the work, we've done some case studies recently for the U.S. Department of Education, and we were specifically looking at programming that focused after-school programs and expanded learning programs, particularly after-school programs, that looked at college and technical education, building English language skills, and STEM, which is a big element for lots of folks. Let's see, I have very little time, but for CTE programs, the college and technical education, it's really an emphasis on problem solving. And really a big factor behind all three of these different kind of programs is that the programs are intentional about what they're doing. If your outcome is really to get kids engaged as a precursor to student achievement, that's great. So helping build the so what behind why do I need to learn this in real world problems are activities that can be structured in any expanded learning program. And it helps build sort of those grit factors that people are talking about a lot now. We're more calling them personalized learning skills. And really those are there to build the kinds of skills you need either in the workforce or just in life, which is strong communication skills, good teamwork, and then really on college and technical education, really building a way for students to feel like they have a pathway, whatever they're interested in, that they have a pathway. Not exactly sure how to close. Are we ending in 2 minutes?
No, you're fine.
Our work did some case studies, and the case studies really talked about. Oh. You guys hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can keep going, Carol. We can hear you.
I'm not hearing you guys anymore. Did I mess up?
Carol?
Okay, good. Really, the case studies there are examples of the kinds of work that when we went out across the country to look at urban, rural, a cross-cutting variety of programs that exemplified the kinds of work that we saw specifically on college and technical education for expanded learning programs. Building businesses, in both of those instances. And then really, as I mentioned before, the pathway concept and moving along there. And then for English language learners, we really saw that there were 4 key domains of language development that after-school programs, expanded learning programs needed to be intentional about. And that was really focusing on reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and really building an understanding of context. Specialists using specialists for targeted support for children who are or students who are learning English in their program is also additional help, and really providing more of a basis for social emotional learning, and bringing in people who have that technical expertise really helps kids move along the pathway more quickly towards learning English and being mainstreamed more into English programs, the regular classroom, rather. Really providing a strong base of culturally relevant programming is also something that programs should be intentional about, and making sure that parents are considered partners, not just afterthoughts. So there's definitely also a need for strong professional development, and I would say that goes across all programs. I think Yale mentioned earlier that that professional development, why not offer professional development opportunities for out-of-school time staff as well as school-based staff? And we've really seen that where that happens, there's much more cohesion between the after-school program and or the expanded learning program or increased day and the regular school day. We have a couple case studies here of building English language skills. And when I talk about intentionality, really this idea that students learn to love language, that's an intentional outcome that they're working on. That doesn't necessarily translate into increased grades, but again, it's a precursor. And then in STEM, a lot of the same elements are there in terms of engaging, building engaging activities and really hands-on opportunities, and being intentional about saying what it is that kids are learning in the process so they can apply that to their regular school day activities. But the other key factor here is building community partnerships and making sure that those are strong, and that, again, everyone is on the same page about what the outcomes are, whatever they might be. So here are a few case studies of people who are working in after-school and expanded learning programs. Really, the forensic science activities provide more of that on-the-job learning. And then the Red Cloud Indian School really has a strong partnership with the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, and that really creates a much stronger link between what happens in the out-of-school time and what happens during the school day, and provides a practical context. So, let's see, all right, we are ready for questions, if we have time.
Yes, any questions? What I'm going to do now is, while we wait for any other questions to come in, I'm going to go back to the 2 questions that we had received earlier, and these were in regards to, I believe, I apologize, I can't remember. I think they were Mr. McNown's, his information on aligning the increased learning time, academic supports with student data. And the questions were, most schools work for 7 to 8 hours. How did the teachers respond to an additional half hour?
I'm assuming folks can hear me. So I will say that broadly, teachers in expanded learning time schools respond positively to it over time. However, to reiterate, this is one of the reasons that planning is so important, and this means planning with a planning team from the school that includes the principal and several teachers, perhaps the AP, et cetera. But when teachers are a part of the planning process, they feel as though they own this work, and they're the ones that develop the implementation plan. They're the ones that talk with their other colleagues and build support for this work. And expanded learning time is not right for every school and every teacher, every faculty. But with a proper planning process and with the proper leadership and messaging, and when teachers can understand that it's not all about more face time with their students, it's about, yes, some more time with their students, but just as importantly, more time to be with other adults, to plan and to collaborate, which is why the quality of teacher planning and collaboration is an area of focus during this planning work as well. They tend to be more and more willing to embrace it. With all change is difficult. The second year gets a bit easier, the third year, the fourth year, and by the way, as your teaching staff evolves over those years, the new folks that come in, they enter that world. It's not new to, it's the only experience they've known in that school.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, have you used extended time with blended learning, incorporating technology or online learning?
Yes. An example is in Fall River Public Schools in Massachusetts, south of Boston, where a few of their schools have expanded learning time and incorporated blended learning into the school day. This requires planning too, and it can be a powerful complement for students in terms of differentiating instruction for them. It is another change episode, though, that is incredibly important to plan for carefully and to plan with the teachers. And so blended learning can be a powerful addition to the quiver, in addition to expanded learning time, to promote school turnaround, school improvement, student performance improvement, and an expansion of the modalities that students are able to interact with content through. And I would be glad, again, please don't hesitate to reach out if anyone's interested in talking in more detail about any of this. I would be glad to talk in more detail.
Okay, thank you. And this next question is for Carol. Did you do any work with rural districts that you can speak of?
Yes, we did. Quite intentionally, we looked at rural districts to make sure that we were looking at a wide range, not just urban programming, but rural programming, ex-urban programming as well. The example of the mines, working with the Native American Indian Reservation and the students there was definitely a rural program. But in our case studies, we had a fairly decent representation of rural programs as well as urban. A lot of the principles are the same, though. Even in building strong collaborations, you want to make sure that you are intentional about building that support.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for any of our panelists today? All right, well, we want to thank all of our panelists for joining us, as well as all of those who are in attendance. The last thing that we will ask that you do is when you close out of this event, you'll be taken to a survey site, and that survey is extremely important to REL Appalachia as we move forward for additional, whether it's webinar events or in-person events, but the data that is gathered during that survey is used to inform our practice not only in the near future, but then for the coming years. So if everyone could please just take a few moments. Again, you'll be automatically transferred to the site when you close out of the webinar software. If you'll answer those questions for us, and we thank you, please remember to check the REL Appalachia website for additional events that may be coming up, both in person and online events. And there's also interest in contacting some of our presenters offline, and we will provide that information to you if you will just contact me either through the software or through the email that you received when you signed up for the event. I'll be happy to provide that information to you. So with that, do any of our speakers have anything else to share before we go? All right, again, thank you. I'll remind our speakers to stay on as we close out, and please ask everyone that's in attendance to complete the feedback survey once you are redirected there when you close. Thank you.